The latest information and analysis of events from around the world with Basil Valentine on today's News Talk, TNT.
And welcome back to the Basil Valentine Show today, Tuesday, the 20th of August, 2024. I was watching the Olympics. I thoroughly enjoyed it this year. Of course, in 4 years' time, it's in Los Angeles. And after that, it's in Brisbane, 2032. I mentioned that to a friend. We're talking about the 2032 Olympics. I mean, it's a date that it's straight out of tomorrow's world, isn't it? We truly are living in the future for those of us over 35, like myself, who were wondering a few years ago what life would be like in the year 2000. But here we are in 2024. One thing that is unique about it is the most extraordinary election cycle, well, in modern American history, I would say. And to help me unpick various aspects of it is Rebecca Walser. Welcome to the program, Rebecca.
So glad to be with you. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Now, back in 1992, Bill Clinton got elected on the simple phrase, well, it's the economy, stupid. That's what was written on the whiteboard in the campaign room, and got him over the line against the first George Bush, even though the economy was actually recovering at the time. Now, you're the expert. I merely have a first degree in economics from Cambridge University. And one of the things we learned was that if you print lots of money and inordinate amounts, I mean literally inordinate amounts, trillions of dollars have been printed by the Biden administration over the last few years. And yet we're not seeing the kind of hyperinflation that theoretically, at least, should or could or would have happened. Is that down the pipeline? And on the back of that, I'd say Americans certainly aren't feeling any better off than they were 4 years ago, are they?
Well, I certainly can speak for myself and say, absolutely, I'm not. I don't think that, I run a wealth management practice, a tax law practice, and I don't think that most people that I even speak to do either, Basil. But I just think, Bill Clinton, going back to him, he actually was a good president from a fiscal policy perspective. He balanced the budget. Yes. We actually had surpluses. Yes. And even though that's Absolutely. A Democrat, that's a different day and age in the 90s, right? Early 90s, 92. So we have gone so far away from that. We are fully engaged after the TARP program, which was the 2008 beginning of the great financial crisis, global financial crisis. We had Bush Jr. introduced Too Big to Fail and Troubled Asset Relief Program. But Obama came in January of 2009. And I'm going to tell you, Basil, we literally did see, I am calling it a spade. We absolutely did switch monetary policy at the Fed beginning in 2009, and we really went to modern monetary theory, MMT. And we have been on that since then. Our economy has not been allowed to collapse as it should based on central bank policy. You can look at this in 2020, when the market began, we shut down the economy. The first time in the global history that because of a pandemic, we shut down commerce because we decided to quarantine instead of any other way of handling it, or, one of the ways. And so the markets dropped immediately, Basil, but then they came and shot right back up because that's when the central bank said, we're going to come in and we're going to print. And when you print globally the equivalent of $20 trillion into your currency, you cannot do that without repercussions. I don't care what your Keynesian economic theory says, that as long as you can pay the tax on your tax, the debt, as long as you can service that debt, you're fine. That is not true. And as much as we've had economic data obfuscated, we are under a complete obfuscation of real, true economic data. We have had really, let me give you one example. When you see the jobs growth that this Biden administration is promulgating out there, it's not until 6 months later that we get a revised report that says, yes, that job growth is there, but those are all non-citizens. All of these jobs, we've lost full-time jobs of domestic American citizens, and we have picked up a lot of part-time jobs that are going to non-citizens. So you can see economic data and you can couch it one way, but the truth and the reality is a lot uglier.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I've seen a figure of $34 trillion. That's an awful lot of dollars. Most people can't conceive of that number. And as you say, Bill Clinton managed to produce surpluses. I mean, it seems like a different planet, but the numbers have become so unreal that it's now a case of the entire United States is too big to fail. There was that huge wobble a couple of weeks ago when money came off the markets, but it seems that the bubble just keeps on growing because nobody can afford for it to burst completely.
You couldn't be more right. I mean, there are so many players that can't afford for this debt fiat bubble that we've created. What really happened, if you want to just break it down so simply to just the lay person out there, I know your audience is sophisticated, but if you look at this from a basic economic supply and demand perspective, when you went into 2009 and you started hyperinflating or printing, that money has to go somewhere. So if you look at the stock market from 2009 to present day, with the exception of 2022 when we did have a pullback, mostly because the Fed stopped printing and started quantitative tightening and raised interest rates the fastest and the largest we've ever seen in the history of our nation. So there was actually some Fed central bank response to the fact that we printed everything that we printed in 2020 and 2021. They first labeled it transitory, but when that could no longer overcome the massive increase in prices that people were experiencing at the grocery store, they finally started to admit, okay, it's not transitory. We're going to have to deal with it. We're going to have to raise the cost of rates, the cost of money. And so therefore we raised rates. But when you keep the cost of capital beginning in 2009 at a Fed funds rate of 25 basis points, so we're not even above a quarter of a point in the risk-free rate. When you're keeping it that way for 15 years, if you don't understand the asset bubbles that are going to be created from companies that are high risk, that can go out and borrow at almost, nothing, 3%, low cost of capital, it's going to take on risk. It's going to prop up assets because people can afford a $600,000 house in the US dollars at a 3% rate, where they can only afford maybe, $250 at a 6 or 7% normalized rate. So this created real estate bubbles commercially and the consumer side. This created all kinds of business expansion, the mezzanine debt that we have, this collateralized loan obligations, the CLO debt that we have. We have a much bigger financial derivative problem in 2024 than we have ever had anywhere close to in 2008.
Yeah, I've heard there's some figure, a quadrillion or something, in derivatives out there, which can sort of never be paid back. I thought that was a number that children made up in the playground, a quadrillion, but it is actually a real number. I mean, these sums are just, off the charts. Doesn't begin to cover it, does it?
I mean, when you understand that you artificially kept the cost of creation of wealth arbitrarily low for 15 years, you are going to understand how the assets have gotten this large. And if you just look at the top 10 investment banks in the United States, yes, those alone have $1 quadrillion worth of derivative assets on their balance sheets. Now, this is a problem. This is a huge problem. And no one is prepared because they keep getting machinations that stymie the problem for a week, a month, 3 months, a little bit of cash infusion here, a little less quantitative tightening there, waiting. And so everyone is needing the asset bubble to continue because they don't want the pain that comes from the reconciliation to true value that must come. The piper will be paid, and it will come.
Now then, food, fuel, housing, and healthcare are the 4 key things that nobody can really do without. You can do without the healthcare if you don't get sick, but you can't do without fuel. You can't do without fuel in the United States because you don't have much of a public transport network, and you can't do without housing, although hundreds of thousands of people do. To what extent do you think those 4 things, and the cost of them, of course, are going to be the key factors in the election this November?
It's really just, like you said, it's the most strangest election in my history of my lifetime, and certainly all the history books that I've studied. We've had some weird things happen before, but not this close to the election. And when you really look at what's happening right now with the transferring of the, Democratic Party from Biden to Kamala, what we're not getting access to is her policy positions, her interviews. She was interviewed basically for the first time since really coming out by her own vice president, not the media. No one's getting actually her policy position. She did have a policy conversation about the economy and housing and how she wants to attack that. But, I'm seriously concerned because all of her policies that she held before becoming the vice president, that she even exercised while being the vice president, for example, not having a containment method of remain in Mexico at the border. That remain in Mexico policy was done under President Trump under an executive order, and Biden administration on the very first week of his office ended the remain in Mexico policy so that the border then became very porous. So when you have somebody that comes from being a senator from the state of California, which is like the seventh largest economy in the world, and they believe in open borders and universal health care. What that basically says is we don't have a country. Come here if you want. And not only will you come here, but you will come here at the expense of the U.S. taxpayer who is going to pay your health care. When that is the position that somebody had, and all of a sudden we can't get their policy positions, and now they are the Democratic nominee of the presidential election that's happening in just less than 90 days, this is a huge problem. We need to understand what was the metamorphosis that Kamala no longer believes in open borders and healthcare for all, when that's what she has believed her the entire time she's been a politician, which is many years.
Yeah, and a very bad politician at that. And I don't say that as a diehard Trump supporter. It's just an observation. They're keeping her wrapped up because she talks in word salads and seems to have a sort of a sort of teenager's grasp of the English language at best. They're keeping her wrapped up. To what extent do you think Donald Trump can capitalize on that and paint her as the imbecile that she clearly is?
I think that when you look at Trump and you assess him, he has been painted since that very first day he came down the escalator. That was the day that the media completely switched and said, oh my gosh, this isn't the friend that's donating to our campaigns anymore that has the Apprentice show. This is a serious contender for the conservative side of the U.S. politics. And when you saw that, you can get the media to couch him and paint him and give him a light in a certain way. The media is fine to rewrite the history of Kamala and to say that she wasn't the border czar and she wasn't this and she wasn't that, which we can clearly establish. Go back and look at the Wayback Machine and see for yourself the White House announcement on her as the border czar. But the point I'm trying to make is the media has no problem making Trump look a certain way. But you know what happens when you meet your mettle? You know what happens when you know that you are going to have to make your salt be evident? When that assassination attempt happened and he went down on the ground and he came back up and he had the internal fortitude to say to the Secret Service, no, wait. And he put his hand in the air and he said, fight, fight, fight. That was organic. That was off the cuff. That was after the man had someone just tried to kill him publicly in front of thousands and thousands of people on national television. If you have that kind of fortitude, then you have character. You have worth, you have salt in you that can lead this country through the most difficult time period I think that we will ever see since the Civil War. That is coming. We are on the verge of another pandemic, potentially World War III escalation. We have global economic change happening to digital assets. Everything is coming at us. This is the convergence of all things. This is not the time to have anybody who will not sit down and answer directly into the camera exactly what their policy positions are for the American public.
Well said. But I think Harris is going to be another puppet, rather like Biden was if she gets back in. At the moment, there's so much euphoria around her campaign. The honeymoon period seems to have lasted right the way through to the convention and maybe possibly afterwards as well. It's all done on fumes, vapor, and the feel-good factor, but it seems to be working at the moment. That's the thing. And of course, she's got the advantages of semi-incumbency. Now, amongst those advantages, and Matt Gaetz has pointed this out, that photo of Trump punching the air seems to have been scrubbed from the internet. I'm not sure we're going to get a fair fight up to November, including with the vote itself.
I mean, I could not agree with you more, Basil. This is the closest I think our country has been to a division of extremes that could lead to an escalation. I would hate for anything like that to happen, but when you have the big tech censorship that is literally taking off the photo of an event that happened in the last 2 months during the middle of this election, I think that the fight is clearly unfair. And I think the American people really need to wake up and start asking themselves, okay, the media didn't have access to Biden. Biden didn't have a cabinet meeting since October of 2023. The media didn't press for an interview. The media is complicit in allowing puppets, Manchurian candidates, to be put up when the real governing is happening somewhere else by someone else. And who is that? We, as the American public, have a right to know, and we should demand to know who is running this world, this country, because clearly it is not the people that they are putting up and saying that is running the world.
Well, one likely candidate is Barack Obama, and he's due to address the convention tonight after his wife has done so. He was a little bit slow in coming out in support of Kamala Harris. Do you think he might play a bigger role in the campaign? She needs more troops on the ground, doesn't she?
Yeah, I don't really know the blood between Obama and Kamala. I took his hesitation to initially endorse her as maybe him trying to seem like there would be some semblance of a democratic process, that there might be multiple candidates and that someone didn't just get nominated or appointed into this position. I think maybe he was trying to attempt to seem like it was more democratic than it was, but clearly this was an appointment. This was let's replace this person for that person. The machine decided, and they moved Kamala in, and Obama agreed and got in line. So I don't know if he was just trying to make it look more democratic, but I don't believe that he is. I believe that Michelle Obama is quite close with her, as I understand from the sources I have, but I don't know what the situation is between her and Barack.
And right now, because we like a flutter here on the Basil Valentine show, if you had $10 to pick the winner, who is going to be inaugurated in January, Harris or Trump?
So my answer might surprise you. I actually don't believe we're going to have an election in the United States of America in November.
Wow.
I don't think that it's going to happen. I believe there will be some intervening events that will bring some knowledge forward of what happened even on the last election cycle, and that the election will not actually happen. That's my professional opinion based on the data that I have.
Well, Rebecca Walser, thank you very much. And I'll be watching for that very, very closely. Thanks so much for joining us today on today's News Talk, the home of free speech.